Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, or good evening. Pete Pardo here from Sea of Tranquility. Welcome to another edition of Friday Morning at the Fun House with Martin Popoff. Good morning, my friend. How are you?
Yes, morning, sir. Morning, sir. I'm doing okay. You know, we talked offline a bit about the weather down there. I mean, it's been brutal. I've had the CNN on all day watching, and yesterday just watching what's been going on. But we missed all that here. I guess Toronto's too far, way too far inland. But you know, it's going up into Canada too. So.
Yeah, I mean, New York City got hit really, really bad. We got hit pretty bad here in the Hudson Valley. We were just talking how I don't think I've seen this much rainfall in, probably like not quite 24-hour span of time as we got, comparatively speaking, to it was a 2009 hurricane that we had. This was not far from it. I think if it would have lasted a little longer, we would have been at that same level. But yeah, it's just the amount of water that was coming down like per hour was a little crazy. And my backyard is still really, really soggy, and I'm sure that's going to be the case for a couple of days. But the sun's been out for the last day and a half, so
and there's nothing that can be done about it, I don't think, because I short of bringing the world's population to like 500 million people or whatever, and coal-fired plants in China, stop ordering stuff, just cancel all orders for stuff from China, so those plants have to close down, and don't make it in America either. Just say no more stuff, no more concrete foundations poured for anything. We could have the reset and all that stuff. We could have possibly canceled vacation travel on airplanes. I mean, that was the one time when it looked like you could have probably told people, you know what, we're not bringing back air travel. And, half the population might've said, yeah, not a bad idea. Right. So, but that blew over. We're back into revenge travel and all that stuff. Right. So I really, I don't think there's a political solution, because you have to involve the whole world, including India and China, on the whole thing. And how do you make an agreement on that? Right. So.
Yeah, I mean, that's the problem is the whole world is not in agreement on anything. So it's just things perpetuate. And but that's a story for another day, right? Today, it's all about the big bombs, right? So, Martin and I were talking a couple of weeks ago, just trying to figure out topics to talk about. And this whole concept of these albums that either had a lot of hype, and didn't actually set the world on fire, or albums that followed a huge album that, you would think the success would carry over, and for whatever reason really did. Yeah. So this whole concept of bombs are more about, this is not whether Martin and I like these albums or not. It's more about how these albums they just sank, and maybe shouldn't have. And we might make the case that some of these albums are actually really, really good, and we don't understand why they bombed. There's other instances where we'll probably say, yeah, this album tanked for a reason, right? So I'll have Martin kick us off with his first selection of the day.
Yeah, that's good background on it, because there are different things to talk about with all of these, right? So I'm going to start with this one right here. There's your CD, ZZ Top Recycler. And there's your LP of it, ZZ Top Recycler. So this is a situation where you have an album that goes way past Diamond in Eliminator. You've got Afterburner, so they're already naming it to say this is still burning, but it's after Eliminator, and that thing goes 5 times platinum. And then this thing comes out, and it goes just platinum. And what's so annoying about this? Well, number one, it's the another interesting situation. It's the last one for Warner Brothers with ZZ Top. I kind of looked up, the deal at the time when they moved over to RCA. They got one of these, who knows how simplified this is, but they got some sort of $30 million deal to go to RCA, right? And I saw a quote there saying, we just don't want to be another one of the many platinum selling acts on Warner Brothers, right? So this does go platinum, and Antenna, the first one for RCA, goes platinum, and then they never get another certification ever again. So if it was this $30 million deal where, it was kind of quote unquote, no strings attached or whatever, I don't think RCA is happy with what's gone down with that deal. But the other thing that is quite annoying about this record, this certainly fits in the category of I don't like it. ZZ Top, I've said, is my favorite band of all time, arguably, right? But this actually very likely is my least favorite ZZ Top album of all time. I found it also very annoying that Billy said things like, we were going to do the whole same thing again with the sequencers and drum machines. But then when we got in the studio, we kind of looked at each other and started jamming and all this stuff. And, he says it's a cross between Tres Hombres and Eliminator, right? And there's like 2 songs that are a little bit bluesy. And I went through very carefully and listened to all the drums and stuff on them. There's nothing very analog sounding on this, even the quote unquote couple of songs that made it like Tres Hombres. Like, forget it. It's literally the same thing all over again, especially with the likes of Concrete and Steel, Love Thing, Tell It, Decision or Collision, Burger Man, Double Back. All of that are exactly like Afterburner, but they're warmed over TV dinners, right? Kind of thing. It just gets worse and worse. And so this does more or less bomb at platinum. But it's just a bridge too far. And, even calling it Recycler is just like daring you to not like it. Right.
Yeah.
And there's your Afterburner, daring you that it is just recycled thing all over again. And it totally is. It's like
it
step
totally
down,
is.
step down. Yeah.
Yeah. I remember buying that when it came out, and that's exactly what I thought. It's like, wow, this is actually titled pretty close to what it is, and being massively disappointed in it. And still to this day, I'm even not a big fan of Afterburner either. Lately, back in the day, I was like, all right, because we were all into those albums back in the day. But man, Recycler. In fact, I think, if I'm not mistaken, I bought that on CD when it came out, and I sold it. And I actually got it back again when I bought the little box set with all of the remaster of all of them. Yeah, that's how much I disliked that at the time.
Yeah,
it's a great choice. That's a great choice. All right,
I would definitely probably put this my second least favorite. You're right. Sleeping Bag's really cool. I was looking at the tracks and thinking there's a few okay songs on it. It's my second least favorite. Yeah,
I agree. So my first choice today, I could have gone with the album that came before this, and I could have gone with the album that came before that one. It's interesting to look at the trajectory of this band and to see that kind of line of albums that just start to really underperform, and to see a fan base and a public perception really change for a big band, right? But this album I chose not only because the sales were terrible, and it was, I believe, the first album in many that did not even certify for them, but the whole concept for the whole thing just was a complete and utter failure at the time. Kiss, Music from the Elder.
Right. Yeah.
The band's first stab at a concept album, all right, a big grand conceptual theme. Not the kind of band you think would do something like that, right? Ever, but they gave it a shot. This did not even go gold. So this follows Unmasked, which just barely squeaked out gold. It follows Dynasty, which I think only went platinum or barely above that. Yeah. And that was seen as a massive disappointment at the time. But this didn't even make the top 50. And so, you're looking at a time where this was, what year was this, Martin? 81, something like that?
80. Yeah, I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think it was 81. Kiss was massive just not that long before then. But this, the fans and the critics reacted completely negative towards this album. The band didn't even tour to support it. What does that tell you right there? And I think that, they got Bob Resman to produce this. He's gone on record saying that he was doing so much coke at the time that he was probably steering them in directions that they weren't comfortable with. You've heard all these stories about who played on it, who doesn't play on it. Paul Stanley now says, I don't know why I agreed to do that, all this kind of stuff. And this just became like the joke. And I remember even myself, who was a huge Kiss fan, just a couple of years beforehand, I wouldn't go near this with a 10-foot pole. I had moved on to other bands and other things, but still I was listening to Kiss and still buying the records. I didn't even buy this back in the day because of, what I heard from it, I didn't like. And the outpouring of hatred from so many was so great that I was like, to me, I was like, oh, I shouldn't be caught dead with that album, right? I've since warmed up to it a bit. I still think it's one of Kiss's weaker records, but I don't, I don't think it's bad as what I originally thought. But it's still looked at, and especially back in the day, as a major, major misstep for a band. They've since never, they've never gone back to do something of this kind of scope since, and that's probably for a good thing. But man, it just sunk without a trace at the time, and I think most of us kind of thought back then is the end of Kiss near, right? Have they sunk so low that they can never kind of work their way out of it? Which, of course, they proved everybody wrong, right? They took off the makeup and just kind of reinvented themselves, right? Which I guess they had to. But yeah, this, I mean, man, you can't pick out much of a bigger bomb at that time than The Elder.
Yeah, and even the annoying thing of music from The Elder, right? Okay, well, there is no movie called The Elder, but this is music from The Elder.
Right.
So it's a quasi soundtrack album or a prequel or something like that. And you can't get out of your mind that it's a concept album, and Kiss just does not make sense. You don't think any of those guys think conceptually, so it just feels like a big fake, right?
Right. And remember the costumes? I was just absolutely disgusted when I saw the way they looked. I was like, oh my God, that's Kiss. But, going back on it, I mean, there's some good stuff on here. The Oath is a terrific song. Heavy, Mr. Blackwell. I mean, there's some good tracks on here, but, as the concept that they set it out to be, does it work? Yeah. Not really, but I think a lot of fans have warmed up to it over the years, though, quite a bit.
Yeah. Cool. All right.
Maybe not the critics, though.
Yeah, my next choice is going a whole different way on this topic, and then we'll be back to the same way on some other ones. But I'm going with New York Dolls, the debut album, New York Dolls, and there's the second one. They only made two, right? The reason I went with this is I've been talking with David Krebs a lot lately, and New York Dolls were part of the Lever Krebs camp. And although it wasn't a direct signing thing, there's a guy there, Howard, worked with the Dolls more so. But as David says, and this makes perfect sense. He says the guys would say, I could point you to a corner of my apartment and there'd be like a 2-foot tall stack of press on us. They were so hyped at the time. They were regularly talked about. I remember in all those old Melody Makers and possibly Enemy Sounds, whatever. I mean, those English newspapers, there were articles on these guys going back to 1972 because they made this big splashy tour of the UK in 72. That's when their drummer, Billy Mercia, died in London on that tour. But, there's all these articles on the New York Dolls. Everybody knows who the New York Dolls is. They don't even have an album out yet because this comes out in 73, right? And the other thing David said that was pretty interesting is that you could go see the Dolls 10 times live, and 9 times out of 10, they'd be the worst band in the world. And one of those 10, they'd be the best live band in the world, right? I don't know if I completely buy that, but I'll tell you one thing that's a myth about this album is that they aren't very good or they're raw or whatever. They're well put together. This has got some good heavy metal on it, some great heavy Stonesy stuff on it. Excellent songwriting, top to bottom. This is a 10 out of 10. This is probably a 9 out of 10. This is produced by Todd Rundgren. This is produced by Shadow Morton. They're both produced fine for the years. There's a lot of ear candy on them, a lot of variety. They're just very professional albums. But it is true. I mean, they had a lot of drug problems, and I'm sure they were pretty crappy live most of the time. But great albums. I wanted to include them because they were total bombs. They didn't sell. I mean, Phonogram, Mercury thought they were going to be great. They were assigning out of the Chicago office. Cliff Bernstein was there at the time, right? This is when Cliff actually became friends with David Krebs, and then they joined forces at Lever Krebs. But just a funny delete story on this album. So my small town of Trail, BC, we had a few different record stores there, record stereo stores, and this one where myself and my buddy Forrest Hoop ended up working at, starting at like 14 years old or whatever. Big record department. But this record, both of these records, for some reason, our little town of Trail, BC ended up with like 150 copies of each of them. And they started at $6.99, then they went to $4.99. They had their own little nook with the wooden bins. Literally, these two
Funny.
records. They went down to $4.99. They went down to $2.99, and I think I finally bid at 99 cents. So I bought mine in
You
Canada.
waited it out, right?
Sealed at 99 cents, right? So it's, I could still picture it in my head, like, what are all these New York Dolls albums doing here? Both of them, 150 copies of each of them in Trail, BC, right? It's so weird. But you know, that there's probably some weirdness going on there with the idea that everybody thought this was going to be a big band because of so much press. But as David says, you know, middle America was not ready for that album cover.
No.
You know, it just, you know, in 1973, this was, I guess, just too shocking. And it bombed. So there's a bomb right from the start.
And, you know, they're an interesting scenario because, as you mentioned, they were hyped big time from the beginning, even before they had the album. And again, I was a little too young to remember that, but I remember post Dolls, they've been hyped forever.
Yes.
They're still talked about as one of like the most influential bands of all time. And you meet so many people like, oh, the Dolls were great, but still nobody bought these albums.
Yeah.
So it's amazing how much coverage they've gotten in the years before and since, yet they're still looked at. I mean, you mentioned that nobody bought these, the sales were abysmal for these. Nobody bought these records.
Yeah.
But yet they're still talked about and thought of as they were that mega band.
Yeah, absolutely. And David Johansen had a solo career, you know, basically on the Reputation. The Dolls came back and did at least 2, if not 3 studio albums. Sadly, we've just lost Syl. So we've lost most of them. Syl, Arthur Kane, Billy Murcia, I think one other person, David Johansen's still with us.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Well, yeah. Johnny Thunders, of course. So yeah, literally one of the early guys is still alive, and that's just David Johansen at this point. Yeah, Johnny Thunders, Syl Sylvain, David Johansen, yeah, Arthur Kane, Jerry Nolan. Yeah, I think he's gone too. So but yeah, and so much just literally on an objective, like, you know, if you're going to force someone to listen to these records, they're not going to hate them the way they're going to hate the Three Stooges albums, because, you know, those are rough and raw and crazy, right? But these are just like well executed albums. So
yeah. All right, my next choice here. This is an example of a real, for me anyway, a really, really good, if not great album following up a blockbuster, and for some reason, nobody cared. Toto Isolation.
Okay.
So of course,
what a great album cover, eh?
Yeah, the album cover is terrible. Yeah, it's just awful. Yeah, you know, and the logo, it's no logo. It's just, yeah, this does not scream a follow up to Toto 4 at all, right? Because that album cover is kind of majestic looking, and you know, it screams this is a hit sort of thing. So you know, Toto 4 sold triple platinum. It's I think to date has sold like 12 million copies worldwide. It had all those big hits, you know, Rosanna and Africa, won 6 Grammys. I mean, Toto were one of the biggest bands on the planet in 1982. So 2 years later, you know, they bring in a new singer, Freddie Fredrickson. They release this album, which quite frankly, I like better than Toto 4. It's not even close. But no singles. You got this new voice in the band who, you know, for some, he's got this really high pitched voice, might turn some people off. This only went to number 42. It barely squeaked a gold status. Okay. And it turned out to be Fergie's, did I say Freddie? Fergie Fredrickson. I always get his name wrong. Turned out to be his only album with the band. He had vocal problems at the end of the tour, and that was it, you know, that was it for him in the band. And quite frankly, the band never achieved that status ever again. It's almost like they had the one really big album. You know, their debut did really well. Hydra did okay. But, you know, Toto 4 was their really big, massive hit. And really, other than the debut, was their only really huge blockbuster of an album. But it's just amazing to me that a band who sold so many records and had all these hit singles, they were all over MTV, Grammy Awards, all this sort of thing, and that people just ignored completely the follow-up album. I mean, completely. I mean, it didn't even sell a fraction of the copies. And granted, there's probably, I'm looking, you know, I love this album. I mean, Carmen, Lion, Stranger in Town is a great song. Should have been a hit single. Angels Don't Cry is a hard rocker. How Does It Feel? Again, should have been a single. Endless is a good rocker. The title track is great. Mr. Friendly is fun. Change of Heart, Hollyanna. I mean, to me, maybe it's just me, this album, top to bottom, is so strong. It's so immediate, so much fun, and nobody gave a shit. And it's just, I don't know, have we ever, I don't know if we're going to see any huge drop-offs like this in our picks at all. I mean, but this is massive. I mean, just like the fact that just people just ignored this in droves. Maybe, I don't know what you think about this, Martin, maybe in the 80s, you can't take 2 years between albums. And maybe that's the problem.
Yeah.
Because so much was happening in the 80s, so many bands, you know, so 82 was Toto 4, this is 84, you know, 82, 83, you've got Journey is big, Foreigner are big, you got the hair metal scene coming up, so there's a lot of bands coming up, and maybe there was just too much happening, and we've seen how fickle, you know, music fans are. And even though, yeah, I love Toto 4, but you know what, I found 5 other bands that I like since they released that album, and yeah, I'm not going to bother with Isolation. I don't know, it's a mystery to me how much this completely tanked, yet to me I think it's a better album than the one that came before it that sold millions and millions and millions and millions of copies.
Maybe with the nature of that kind of music, perhaps, you know, there's a little bit of your time is up, people move on, there's not a lot of loyalty, there's not massive brand loyalty for decades. Yeah. With the likes of a band like Toto, arguably, I don't know. Yeah.
You know, too, there's they have been labeled throughout their career as kind of like a faceless band. You know, we've talked about that before, where they don't really have an image. It's like you have the music, but it's all these studio guys that don't do all these interviews. They don't appear at all the awards ceremonies. They're like, if you see a video, you barely see them, right? There's nobody in that band who's a star, right? Steve Lukather, you could say, but like there's no Steve Perry in the band. There's no Lou Gramm in the band. There's no Eddie Van Halen in the band, right? There's no guy that stands out as the superstar in the band, even though Toto 4 was a superstar album. So it's, I don't know. Did that hurt them? It's possible. It's possible. Yeah. A mystery.
Cool. Yeah. All right. So I'm going to go back to a very similar situation to the ZZ Top situation and talk about Aerosmith 9 Lives. So coincidentally, the press at the time, 1991, August of 91, talked about this big deal of Aerosmith moving on from Geffen to Sony for the exact same dollar figure mentioned in the ZZ Top deal, $30 million. They were still going to owe them a couple of records. So what you have happening is you've got Permanent Vacation on Geffen going 5 times platinum, Pump going 7 times platinum. The deal gets done. They still owe Geffen 2 records. I couldn't quite figure out how this was going to work, but I've sort of got an answer. Get a Grip comes out on Geffen, 7 times platinum, massive album. So it's like, oh, Sony's got their deal already. Geffen gets a 7 million seller, right? There is no further studio album for Geffen, but there is the Big One's Greatest Hits album in 1994 that goes 4 times platinum. Huge record. And then A Little South of Sanity, crappy live album. It goes platinum. That's 1998. But so they move on to Sony. So 9 Lives is their first album for Sony. You know, I thought it was okay at the time. I didn't hate it. Just like I didn't, you know, dislike Get a Grip. But now almost everything about this record annoys me. It's got a little bit of that psychedelic Beatles thing on it that I don't like. But and the heavy songs sound forced. It's got Crash is like punk rocky. Oh, look how dangerous we are. You know, most corporate hard rock band of all time. We're punk rock all of a sudden, right? Something's Got to Give. Attitude Adjustment. Attitude Adjustment is pretty cool, but it's got fully at least 4 ballads, and Full Circle is them crossing over into that new country sort of feel. Ain't That a Bitch, Kiss Your Past Goodbye, the big anthemic chorus, right? And Pink is a very annoying song because it's like a poppy little kind of weird little alt rock ditty almost, right? And and 13 songs. Get a Grip was long as well. But essentially what happens is with this, they go down to double platinum, which is still okay. But after this, Just Push Play, which everybody hated even more than this, just went platinum. Honkin' on Bobo, I don't know how that thing went gold, but apparently it's slated, it's certified as gold, which is their blues covers album, right? But Music from Another Dimension or whatever it's called, doesn't certify at all. So obviously this deal isn't working out for them either. It's a little complicated. I mean, it talks about how it's a 4-record deal. But I don't know. I mean, it just, and it also talks about how at the time, 1991, this was going to make them the highest paid band of all time, right? So obviously it was a big deal. Who knows if it's exactly, I think there was a huge Michael Jackson deal at the same time too. But no, so this idea of, what's kind of funny is they do get a seven times platinum for Geffen still after the deal, and they get a 4 times platinum for the greatest hits, and then they get the live album, and then the Sony thing just keeps going down, just like the ZZ Top. But yeah, it's extremely kind of annoying album to me at this point, as is really Get a Grip. I mean, I just really have a whole problem with the premise of Aerosmith in the 90s, kind of the same way I'm really starting to have the same problem with the premise of Ozzy in the 90s. It's the same kind of story. So yeah, not a lot of redeeming factors for this album at all. Everybody kind of hated it at the time. It really did not get much good press. I think what is that? Yeah, Falling in Love is Hard on the Knees was a single, and it's actually a well put together kind of a decent song, kind of a well written song. But everything else in all these different things, these boxes they feel they have to tick for the label, for their new deal, their new bosses, it all just sounds forced. So there you go, 9 Lives.
I guess my question is, what kind of a return did these labels think they were going to get on a $30 million contract? I mean, seriously, that's a lot of money.
With 5 people that have a reputation of fighting like cats and dogs and drug problems and all that stuff. Like maybe they were sober at the time or convincing them they were sober, but we know there's been relapses and stuff. It's just weird signing 5 long-haired guys from Boston, right? And thinking there's any kind of stability to what you just did.
Right. To be able to deliver album after album after album, keep it together, and with the hopes that each of these records are going to sell like 10 million copies. Yeah. It's like they really didn't have that track record, right? It's the same thing with ZZ Top. I mean, ZZ Top was a fairly big band, but Afterburner was that one massive seller. I mean, rock and roll history has showed that most bands, unless you're Led Zeppelin, or the Beatles, very rarely that these bands are going to have that continued success at that level. Right. Not everybody's a Michael Jackson. So to me, listening to these stories, like, what were these labels thinking? That's a huge amount of money to think that you're going to get that kind of return. And then when it doesn't even come close, you're disappointed. Well, what did you expect coming out? It's like, I don't know. Very strange.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost like signing a big sports star, because signing somebody at 30 years old who's on the decline, but they're great right now, and injuries can happen. And
you're going to get maybe 2-3 years tops of elite production, and then the whole back end of that deal is going to kill you, right? I mean, we've seen it in sports is a great comparison, because we see it all the time. It's not much different in music. It's not much different.
But you're hurting cats too at the same time. You got 5 guys and managers, and half these guys probably already had different managers. They probably had 3 managers out of the 5 guys already at this point. I mean, and they had this long history of also being kind of nasty guys too. I mean, there's just, not all of them, but I won't name names, but obviously we know, anybody who's signing that deal at Sony must realize that they're in for a bunch of drama.
Yeah. That's never going to end. Yep. And as we've seen, that drama has continued, right? Yep. Yeah. All right. Here's a band who probably would have liked a little drama to help them with this album here. So this particular band debuts in the early 80s, a supergroup of a bunch of very notable guys from very notable bands who put this group together. It was touted as the next great big progressive rock supergroup, and their debut album sold a shit ton of albums. Went to #1. talking about Asia. All right. They come out like a year later with a follow-up, Alpha. And again, it's kind of the same old, same old. So, you know, the debut does great, and there's reasons for why there's the big disparity here in sales and whatnot. So the first album goes 4 times platinum, 3-4 hit singles. I mean, you couldn't escape like half that album, if not most of it, on the radio after it came out. The big tour, right, did very well on tour, and then they pumped out another one really quickly. What was so great about the debut is that even though, you know, Steve Howe and Jeff Downs and John Wetton and Carl Palmer, I mean, these are guys who the pedigree was there. They come from all, you know, King Crimson and Emerson, Lake and Palmer, and Yes, and the Buggles, so on and so forth. And while that debut is not a full-on prog rock album, it's probably in the history of prog is probably the one best example of how you perfectly blend progressive rock and pop music and really make it work. The album rocks. It's catchy as all hell. There's plenty of great instrumentation and interplay between the musicians, and the production's amazing, right? Songs are great. And then they pump this one out really quickly, trying to play off that success. Yet this doesn't have any of the personality, any of the interplay. It's just, we're just a pop band now. And to me, anyway, I know there's a lot of people that love this album. I thought from day one that this is a complete stinker when compared to that debut. And while there are a couple of good tracks on here, you know, The Heat Goes On. It's great. Eye to Eye is pretty good. You got a bunch of ballads. I don't know. For me, this is just bland pop. It's not very interesting. And the general public thought the same, because they obviously stayed away from this. This barely squeaked out platinum, right? And before you know it, the guys in the band are already having issues with each other. Steve Howe leaves, and then Wetton leaves for a little bit. You know, Lake comes in for a little bit, and Mandy Myers from Crocus comes in. I mean, it's just all this craziness going on. And all of a sudden, this band that had, I mean, because let's face it, Asia had a ton of hype, and that debut lived up to the hype. This just completely just lost all of it. And yeah, for me, and, you know, I think my problem with this band throughout their history, they never lived up to that debut. They have, you know, they've had a million lineup changes, and there's the whole John Payne era, which produced some really good albums. But I think that the original core of this band never, ever, even though they got back together much later on, never really lived up to that debut. But this, to me, and to a lot of people, I think was just a massive disappointment, considering how great that debut was and how much hype there was and all that kind of stuff. It's almost like it was unsustainable for a band of this nature. But they just didn't go back to what worked so well on the first album, and they just decided, and, you know, and maybe you know, I forget like who wrote most of these songs on here, but you almost got the impression that Wetton, you know, who was into doing more ballady stuff in his solo career at the time, maybe he had a huge influence on the songwriting of this album. I'm not really sure, but
yeah, you know, maybe that chemistry was so abstract and magical and obscure, almost like a Van Halen or a The Who chemistry, that it couldn't be replicated for 2 albums in a row. I mean, it's a pretty odd bunch of guys.
It is.
You know, and then what they came up with is greater than the parts, right? It's got a synergy to it, right? So Alpha's more like a theta or a zeta, or past a beta, certainly. So
yeah, and you know, I always got the impression with this band that even though they claimed at the time that this was their full-time gig, it's almost like you were waiting for Palmer to go back to ELP. You were waiting for Howe to go back to Yes, right? And, you know, John Wetton has been in so many projects. It's like, you know, whatever. But yeah, I don't know. It just, to me, I never got the impression that their heart was fully into this one. Whereas the debut, they were probably given a ton of money. You know, it's fresh, it's exciting. And then by 1 year later, it's like the honeymoon's already over, you know?
Yeah. All right. Okay, so my next choice, let's do this one next. So I'm going to go with, just knock my notes on the ground here. Like those notes? Look at that. there's my other notes. Yeah, cut out of like little pieces of paper. So anyways, we've got HSAS, Hager, Sean, Aronson
Shreve.
Shreve. That's probably why this bombed. The name is so hard to
it's
remember,
terrible.
right?
Yeah, it's terrible.
HSAS. I mean, you look at this and you don't know what the name of the band is. Is it this or is it this? You
Right.
know, and of course you have to say both almost, right?
What's the name? What's the title? Then you
Yeah.
got Through the Fire on there, and it's
Through
too
the
much.
Fire, like
Too much writing.
Through the Fire is just so innocuous. We've heard every kind of fire name going into the fire, whatever. But the thing about this record was that it's a pretty darn good record. People like it in the Hager camp, but so that's part of the problem right there. And it was kind of put together out of a little bit of greed. Management was thinking, you know, Sammy and the Journey guys had been friends all their lives from the same area and all that, toured together. And it really ticked off the rest of the Sammy Hager band. They were not happy that this was happening at all. And it essentially was a nail in the coffin of the band. There was one more record and it did quite well, but they were on a tear already before this with the likes of Standing Hampton and stuff, you know, which went platinum, by the way. This did not certify at all. I think the other thing that bothered people about it is just trying to wrap your head around this hyped thing that we went and played live a few times, and then we recorded it, tried to capture that lightning in a bottle, so to speak. And then, you know, obviously it's not perfectly live anyways, but, you know, you're forcing the public to take on this, you know, accounting name project thing. And then you're forcing them to deal with crowd noise. And you know, how is this all going to translate on radio? So there's a barrier up to people liking this. But having said that, it's a pretty heavy album. Whiter Shade of Pale was a single off of this, just a cover of a song I don't want to hear anybody cover ever again. My Hometown, super heavy. The last song in the album was really cool. Missing You and He Will Understand are like really good Sammy Hager in the ballad zone sort of things. Top of the Rock was big, super stadium rock. Yep. It had Valley of the Kings, which was the big kind of Zeppelin-esque one on it. And the production's really good for a live album, quote unquote live album. You know, Bill Church told me that the only one that this didn't really bomb for was the bass player Kenny Aronson, because he wisely took like a $30,000 flat fee to be involved with this, and so he went away with you know, a pretty decent chunk of money, while the whole thing just was overhyped and bombed. There never was another one. Sammy goes back to his solo career for one more album, but there's already a lot of bad blood, and then all of a sudden he's going to be in Van Halen, and that's a whole nother story how that goes down. But and then that obviously really ticked off the band again. You know, that because Sammy Hager was kind of a going concern and doing rather well. Yeah. You know, we can all kind of make fun of the music, and it's like poppy and Bryan Adams and heavy and blah, 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 and all this kind of stuff. But, you know, one of the funny things, I think I've mentioned this before, they ended up with a lot of songs in movies. So anyways, this was a big hype thing. Didn't do well. They pushed it. They tried to make, you know, Whiter Shade of Pale a big deal. Wasn't a big deal. And the album and the band wasn't a big deal. So there you go.
I love that album. I'll go on the record as saying that. I bought it when it came out, and I was like, man, I would love to hear these guys continue with something. And that was, you know, there've been rumblings here and there over the years that they would try and, you know, Sammy and Neil would try and do something together. I don't know. I thought they were a perfect match together. And Neil shreds on that album. Absolutely shreds. Yeah.
You wonder now, come to think of it, as you say that, I mean, what if they would have followed up this live album with a studio album really soon, right?
Yeah.
That would have probably gotten a lot of good press.
I think so. Yeah, I think so. It's a shame what could have been, but yeah, I'm a big fan. I have been since it first came out. You know, I've always liked Sammy's voice, and I always wanted to hear him do something really heavy. And I think a lot of us Journey fans, you know, who really admire Neil, you know, there's plenty of heavy stuff on, you know, heavy-ish things on Journey albums, but we always wanted to hear him do something really heavy. And there you have it, right? And it just, nobody listened to it.
Yep.
Oh, well. All right. What do we got next? All right. So here, here's a perfect example of those massive expectations. A kind of a concept at the time that I think was kind of new, where you have this band who had many classic members, you know, different incarnations over the years, and then we're going to bring everybody together and do an album, and it's going to be great. It's going to be a union of all of the past members of the band, or most of them anyway. So yes, union. I mean, the hype for this was unbelievable at the time, because, if we look back to the years before it, so obviously after Tour Motto, the classic lineup of Yes basically breaks up, right? So then you've got Steve Howe and Alan White and Chris Squire. They decide to put the band back together. They go get Jeff Downes and Trevor Horn from the Buggles. Drama comes out. That lasts an album and a tour. That they break up once again. Then you get Squire and White start working with Trevor Rabin. They're putting a new band together. John Anderson, they invite him to come check it out. He's digging the material. They decide, it was originally not going to be Yes. Then once John Anderson gets involved, it's Yes. So they put out 90125. They bring in all these new legions of fans, right? But, the old school fans are kind of like, I'm not sure I like this kind of West Coast Yes type of thing. They take like forever, like 4 years to put out a follow-up, which is Big Generator, which I almost picked here, which did a fraction of the business that 90125 did. During all of this, you've got Mr. Wakeman, Mr. Howe, Mr. Bruford, and Anderson, because then, after Big Generator, John is kind of like, all right, I'm kind of done with this, with Yes again. So he goes and joins up with his old mates. They put out that Anderson, Wakeman, Bruford, Howe album, which to the classic fans was just what they wanted to hear. That does pretty big business. So fast forward just a couple of years, and all of a sudden the management starts talking, and they're trying to get all these. It's like, what if we do an album where everybody, both camps, come together and, we make an album? Yes, we're going to call it Union of everybody. So Union comes out, and myself included was completely stoked. Then we get this album, and then we start looking at like the liner notes, and like, well, wait a minute. So it says it's featuring Anderson, Bruford, Howe, Kay, Rabin, Squire, Wakeman, and White. That's, most of the classic members right there. But then you look a little deeper, and there's like a million guest musicians on here. And then you're looking at who plays on each track. It's like, well, wait a minute. It's like, the one song is basically the Yes West band. The other song is the ABWH band. It's like, none of these guys are playing on the same songs together. So what kind of a union is this? It's really not much of a union. And, the expectations were so huge. Hardly any of this album barely went gold. All right. They did the big tour in the round, which was a lot of fun. I saw it 3 times. That was cool. That's kind of what we expected. We wanted to see everybody playing together. This did not deliver that at all. In fact, even live, they barely played any of this live. They stuck to all the classic stuff. And I think, like, looking back on it now, most Yes fans look at this as somewhat of a disaster. And I guess the initial sales kind of proved it. And yeah, there's a couple great tracks, but it sounds like all these Yes members playing together, not playing together, and all these guest musicians who have nothing to do with Yes, just trying to flesh everything out. And it's a really, really cold, like, kind of, I don't know what the word is other than cold. It's that there's no warmthness about this album whatsoever. A couple pretty good tracks, but for the most part, I never ever listened to this. And most, serious Yes fans don't look back on this period with any kind of happy feelings or warm and fuzzies whatsoever, other than the tour, which was a lot of fun for as short as that lasted.
Great album cover, though.
Oh yeah, absolutely, right. Well, you got to have that, right? Because if you're going to grab in all those classic Yes fans, Yes is back. Roger Dean's back with the band. All right, I'm buying it. And then you listen to it, you're like, this is not very good.
It's funny when you started talking about it and didn't say what it was yet. I thought, is he talking about Contraband with Michael Schenker and Bobby Blotzer and all those guys? And what is it? Sheer, or Thrasher. Remember the Thrasher thing with Carl Kennedy and all that?
Oh yeah, wow. Okay,
super group thing. Yeah. Funny. Okay, so my last choice for today is Judas Priest, Ram It Down. So the interesting thing about this record is that, they put out Turbo, which gets a lot of complaints, but actually goes platinum.
Yeah.
And it's got some really great songs on it. I actually now like Turbo just because the production, which is, still a lot to complain about, but it's way better than Defender's production. And I actually think it's better production even than Screaming. But what happens is when they make Turbo, the plan originally is to make a double album, and the label rejects that idea. So what you get with Ram It Down was a little bit of taking in the fan complaints about Turbo with the synth guitars and being the hair metal direction and getting the perms and the fancier costumes and that whole bit. So what you get with this is a combination of, frankly, Turbo leftovers, because really they're not great songs. They aren't as great as, Turbo's got Locked In, and Turbo Lover's an amazing song. What's the other really cool one on there? A last song on, anyways, a few good songs on that. So you get a combination of Turbo leftovers, and you get new songs where they're just trying to overcorrect and be super heavy, and they're reacting to, the rise of thrash and all this sort of stuff. And the songwriting isn't great on it. It's a little better than I remembered it. I mean, actually, I think Ram It Down and even Heavy Metal and Love Zone, even though it's a stupid title, you think, you got to hate that song, but it's actually not terrible. So see, the album actually starts off kind of decent. Blood Red Skies is known as a semi-classic on this. But of course, the other thing that happens on this, speaking of ZZ Top, is that it's all very mysterious, but it's all electronic drums. And I use the word all in quotes because they always kind of hedge their bets and say, well, I don't know if it's all, sequencers, maybe a little sampling, and you couldn't do it all, and blah, blah, blah. It pretty much, I went through and took a pretty close listen to it, and I don't hear anything that sounds very analog on here at all when it comes to the drums. And obviously it's not the kind of drumming Dave Holland does anyways. Right. And it results in Dave bouncing himself out of the band. He's really ticked off about having to do this, having to kind of not be on this. And then as time goes on, they go on tour, and as the stories go, the band is not performing well, and Glenn is either coked up or drunk or whatever, like not doing a good job on stage. And I remember that one quote that Dave said, what was it? Something about Dave. He goes to Glenn and says, Glenn, you sound like you're playing with one arm out there tonight. It's just hilarious, right? So Dave obviously didn't take any guff, right, from these guys, but he's ticked off about the whole thing. And obviously, they're tacitly expressing their disapproval of him as a drummer. So anyways, platinum for Turbo. This thing does squeak out gold. It still goes gold. And then of course, what they do is they come back with a very strong album in Painkiller with the new drummer, and that also goes gold. But so the drop off is a combination of a huge commercial drop off that really happens over the course of Defenders was well loved, Turbo, a lot of complaints, and then Ram It Down, even more complaints, even though it was back to a level of heaviness. So just a lot of problems with this. Johnny Be Good, Johnny Be Good, B.Good with an E, is on this, which is a remake of Chuck Berry's Johnny Be Good, where they just kind of keep the lyrics and they write some really crappy heavy metal new music to it. And then it shows up on the Johnny Be Good, B.E.G.O.O.D. movie, which is a real flop as well. So you've got that kind of bad blood going with it. And the Monsters of Rock. What's that?
The fact that they released it as a single and a video, why? All of us were kind of like, what in the world are they thinking here, right?
Yeah.
I mean, as mediocre as that album is, there's a lot better songs on there than that.
Yeah. And they end with Monsters of Rock, which is, jumping the shark over and over from Take on the World to United to heavy metal and all this. And this is the worst of all of them. It's a super dirgy, boring, annoying song with all the big, the big electronic drums. Yeah. So lots to complain about on Ram It Down, but I don't know. I've warmed to it a little more over the last little while.
Yeah, I don't hate it. I think half of it is fun, but man, the whole album just screams cliche, right? I mean, it's almost like the creativity was at like an all-time low with that band. And what's funny is most metalheads, when Turbo came out, like you mentioned, complained a ton about that. I think a lot of fans have warmed up to that album over the years.
Yeah, I certainly
myself included. While I will never consider it on the level of like a Stained Class or anything like that, but it's not the complete turd that I thought it was back in the 80s. So all right, my final pick for today. So here's one that I think suffered in that it was never going to live up to its predecessor. But I think that this is a band that really succumbed to everything else that was going on in the heavy music industry at the time, from image to songwriting to, let's try and play off the success of the big album that we just put out and just kind of do what everybody else is doing. And I think it kind of backfired on them. And I think that the main guy in the band probably, he went on record not too long after this and said that this was kind of a mistake and probably one of our weakest albums, so on and so forth. Slip of the Tongue by Whitesnake.
Yeah.
I'm a massive fan, so I was into this quite a bit at the time. I still like this album, but I think over the years, my perception of Slip of the Tongue has slipped a little bit because, like I mentioned, so they put out the 87 album, the self-titled album, which, done 10 million copies worldwide. This barely made platinum. So here again, Coverdale is completely changing the lineup. You've got Adrian Vandenberg. He's formed, Sykes is gone. He was his big writing partner and lead guitarist for the 87 album. He was gone before they even went on tour for that. So he puts together this makeshift band of Vandenberg and Vivian Campbell and Rudy Sarzo and Tommy Aldridge, right? Really good live band. But the end of the tour, you've got, Vivian's gone already. So he starts writing with Adrian, put together all these songs, and Adrian gets hurt. So he can't actually play on the album. So they bring in Steve Vai to do all the guitar work. Steve's amazing, one of the best guitar players of all time. I don't think he was a great fit for this band. This album is kind of missing that like big chunky riffing of Sykes. It's missing all the bluesiness of the era before then. And it really, this is probably, for me anyway, if you're going to call any of the Whitesnake albums like a true kind of like hair metal or commercial hard rock album of its time, like everybody else was doing, that's this one. It screams like we're just going to try and fit into what everybody else is doing. Too many ballads on here because, of course, Is This Love was huge. So there's 2 tracks on here. Now You're Gone and The Deeper the Love, trying to capture that audience. Neither song really took off like that one did. They redid Fool for Your Lovin'. So once again, they're going back to the old well to give the new take on some old Whitesnake classics. That didn't set the world on fire either. That being said, Judgment Day is terrific. Big Zeppelin-y thing. Wings of the Storm is heavy. Kitten's Got Claws. Cheap and Nasty, kind of hair metal-y. Slip of the Tongue, the title track, is actually really good. There's some great guitar work on here. I don't think that Steve Vai, though, was ever a good fit for the band. Coverdale's vocals also sound like they're slipping, and he would have major vocal issues after the tour. If you listen to some live stuff from that tour, he doesn't sound great. I saw them on that tour. He didn't sound great. End of the tour, basically disbands the band, gets together with Jimmy Page, puts out that album, which did pretty well. But again, that could also be considered somewhat of a bomb because it did sell well, but there was a lot of hype about that. And then the tour kind of blew up. So yeah, this, paled in comparison to the one that came before, but not a terrible album. I still like it. I don't think it's one of their best, however.
Yeah. I almost picked Coverdale Page to talk about.
Yeah, because and I think it's a great album, but I think there was a lot of expectations there, and the fact that they just didn't even finish out the tour. I don't even remember how many dates they did, and then they just were like, I don't know.
Yeah, and the 2 ballads on Slip of the Tongue are just atrocious. I mean, just I can't. They make me mad even hearing them in my head. They're just, the melodies on them are just so bad, right? Just so
it's almost like they're trying too hard, right? They're trying too hard for a hit single when that's really not what these guys were all about. And I think that the identity of Whitesnake kind of was lost here. Like I said, it's not a bad album. I like it. I don't think it's one of their best. It's probably it's in the lower half of their catalog for me anyway. To me, it just sounds like a band that's just trying too hard to fit in and do what everybody else is doing. And it's like, well, everybody else is selling millions of copies doing this kind of thing. We're going to do it too, which, they could have just stuck with a similar formula from the album before, because I don't even think this album sounds anything like the 87 album.
Yeah.
Granted, got different musicians and different songwriting partners, but it's just, you listen to the 2 albums back to back and they're really different from each other.
And you're excited for the 2 remakes on 87, and you're championing them, you're cheering them on, oh, listen to the power of this. And then they do this remake, and the old one, it feels better and cooler even, right?
Yeah.
Because Ready and Willin' is just such a cool, classy album. It's not trying too hard to impress anybody, right?
Absolutely, 100%.
Yeah. And here they are just like adding cholesterol to it.
Yeah. And yeah, you have to wonder if in the what if situation, what if Adrian didn't get hurt and he was allowed to do all the guitars on this album? Would it have been any different? Maybe what if they don't bring Steve Vai in, and what if it's the whole album is Adrian? Because I mean, we've heard Adrian do like kind of bluesy hard rock, forever, right? Vandenberg and the more recent stuff and his solo stuff. So I don't know. And I love Vi as a player. From day one, I never thought he was right in this band.
Yeah, Steve Vai, that's a whole nother conversation, isn't it? Yeah, how he fits in all these metal situations. David Lee Roth, Alcatraz. Yeah, it's weird, but
yeah,
we'll leave it at that.
Yeah, we'll leave it at that. Yeah, that's a story for another day. Those hired guns that don't seem to really fit anywhere they go, right? Might be an interesting show. Anyway, there you have it, everybody. So as Martin and I were talking before we started this, we might revisit this topic again in a couple of weeks and do a part 2, because we each have plenty of other bombs to talk about. So stay tuned for that. And but we've got Mark. What do we got for next week? We got another fun show.
We are set with something. I can't remember what the theme is, but we're set for 2 more weeks, I think, with or at least one.
Yeah, I think we are. We do have, so I'll have to check. Well, I'll announce that in the next couple of days. But yeah, we do have another fun topic for next week. So so stay tuned for that.
Coming up, right? We've got the Monday coming up as well, right?
Yeah. So Monday, Martin will be back on the Hudson Valley Squares on Monday night. We're probably going to have a short Hudson Valley staff, because of course it's Labor Day weekend, so a lot of folks are out doing things with friends and family. So but Martin will be joining us. We'll have a couple of the squares on. Louis Nasser from In the Prog Seat is also joining us, and we're going to kind of do another extension of what we did last week on the Square Show. We're going to be comparing 2 one-off lineup albums. In this case, it's by the same band. So Deep Purple, Come Taste the Band, and Slaves and Masters, right? So the 2 albums in their catalog where they each had that one-off band, one-off lineup, and then that was it. So we're going to be kind of talking about comparing and contrasting. Did they work? Don't they work? Which ones we like better? So that's coming up on Monday night at the Hudson Valley Squares. It's all about those one-off Deep Purple albums. So we got that, and we're kind of doing a similar thing. Just I'll announce it now. On Tuesdays in the Prog Seat Show, we're going to be kind of doing the same thing with Yes Drama and the Emerson, Lake and Powell album. Okay, so again, 2 other really notable one-off albums. So if you're not busy, Martin, you want to join us on Tuesday, we could probably find another seat for you.
We'll take a look. I've got to check my schedule. But yeah.
Okay, let me know. So what do you got going on your end?
Nothing much. Just waiting still for some stock to come in. The reprint of the Merciful Fate, the reprint of the Van Halen, the first copies I've ever seen. They're already on my Facebook all over the place. People show them, but the Yes visual biography and the Nazareth. So that's all at martinpopoff.com.
Cool. Sounds good. Awesome. All right. Thanks everybody for joining, and visit us on the web at www.seaoftranquility.org. We're here on Facebook, we're on Twitter, but more importantly, we're here on YouTube all the damn time. Make sure you subscribe if you haven't already, and click on that notification bell. I get too many people saying, oh, but Pete, when are you going to do a video on this? You talked about this. Haven't you done it? Well, if you click on that notification bell, you'll get that email to let you know every time we post something. That's what that's all for. So thanks for watching, everybody. From Martin Popoff, I am Pete Pardo. See you all very shortly with another edition of Favorite Live Album by Year. We have arrived at 1970, so that's coming right up. Thanks for watching. Take care.